I've got a really great man in me. I've also got a fucking monster. I have never killed anybody, but gee, I've felt like it. Yep. And I'm really lucky a few times in my life that I haven't ended up on the foul side of the law.
Welcome to Crime Scene Gold Coast with Guardian Criminal Law. My name's Mark Savick. I'm the Principal of Guardian Criminal Law, and we'll be bringing you podcasts weekly. Variety of topics that can be very sensitive, so please be careful when you're listening, and if you need any assistance at all, we'll include a lifeline number at the bottom of the page. We really appreciate you subscribing and liking our podcast channel. You can listen to us across most social media platforms, Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, and you'll find us there. We look forward to bringing you many episodes in the future. Okay, welcome back to Crime Scene Gold Coast. Today I have the pleasure of having Mr. Tim Fisk as a guest with us. Welcome, Tim, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing. So I've invited you on because of our connection through Complete Men, the organisation that you run. Can you tell us a little bit about Complete Men?
Well, Complete Men, nowadays it's a charity, and we do a few different things. I think the main reason that we've had some connection is that we run some open men's groups every week. On the Gold Coast here, we've got one at Coomera on Thursday nights and one at Robina on Wednesday nights. And they're called open men's groups because there's lots and lots of different ways men can get together and connect and talk and support each other and have real, genuine conversations rather than the I'll just put my mask on and tell you about how fucking awesome I am or how bad the government is that people tend to do at the pub.
Yes.
And it's called open because I remember there were some times in my life I was looking for a good group, particularly a men's group, and a lot of them were closed or they only met once a month and I needed something this week, that sort of stuff. So we've got that, and we have quite a regular influx of new guys coming in and checking it out, and some of them come once and some of them come for a few weeks or a few months. I remember my first goes were doing that. I didn't need that shit anymore once I found a new girlfriend after my marriage bust up.
Yeah.
And some of them come back and some of them stay and, help run the group, facilitate, model, the growth that they've learned and keep peeling off the next layer of the onion.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about your journey to here? What did you do in your younger years? What was your employment like? What was your social scene like? When did you spend your teens? It would have been in the 70s, mate, 70s, 80s?
Yeah. Born in 58. So I'm 64 now, and I got to tell you, it's an awesome time of life. Not for everybody, but really for me, entering my eldership, and not competing with young guys anymore, but more encouraging them and blessing them. And I've
found that. I don't know when the feeling came upon me, but it was a feeling of sort of power and comfort to find the place that you sit in at this age. And it's about, I equate it to being the guy that sits on the sand dune with the fire going, and he watches the young guys go out onto the sand flats, spearing the fish and then bringing them back to the fire. And you're the one that's taught them all of those things. And you're the one that sort of provides a blanket of safety and some knowledge. And it feels really comfortable to sit in that place. And it extends to what you're saying. You're not competing with young guys. I couldn't think of anything worse than going out and competing with young blokes. I think it must make you look silly as a man of our age.
Well, I forget sometimes, and I still think I'm, Superman or a young guy. But the first time it hit me was I was in the gym probably about 8 years ago, and there would have been a guy there in his late 30s, tats, lots of muscles, protein shakes, pre-workout stuff and everything like that. And I'm having a bit of go. I can't lift as much weight as him. And I go to the water fountain to top up my water bottle. And he sees me going there and we're on a collision course, and he steps back and goes, "After you, sir." And I'm looking around, is my dad here or something?
Okay.
And it hit me big time. He didn't see me as competition.
Yeah.
He was showing me some respect.
Wow.
And it really hit me. I saw him as competition. And that was just such a huge release and weight. It was a life-changing moment.
Wow.
That I no longer had to compete with these young guys, and I had a new role. And it took me a while to work out what that was. But it's like you said, they're bringing in the fish and I'm giving them that unconditional blessing. I can see the good in you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
That's
can
powerful,
see beyond
mate.
that.
That is awesome. I had a similar experience not long ago. I was appearing in Brisbane court, and it was a very simple matter. The client wasn't even required to be there. It was an administrative process on the day. I had plenty of time, and I entered the courtroom, and there was a young lady at the bar table conducting business with the magistrate, and she had quite a stack of files. There might have been half a dozen files, and she'd just been through her first matter with the magistrate. I imagine she was with Legal Aid or the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, looking at the style of files she had. And she heard me enter the room, and she turned around and saw me enter the room, and she said to the magistrate, Your Honour, there is a more senior practitioner who's entered the courtroom. I'd be happy to stand aside. And the magistrate, he was sort of taken aback a little bit, not in a negative way, but he then looked at me and he had a bit of a smile on his face and he said, So what do you think we should do, Mr. Savick? And I said, I thank my friend very much. It's a lovely gesture, but I've got time, Your Honour. I'm happy to sit here. And he then took over and said, I think we will take that offer up. So it was people being nice to one another and that young lady showing some respect, and it reinforced a very similar feeling to the one that you had and was very impressive, I must say, very, very impressive. Yeah.
Well, I just find at my age and having this new outlook and understanding, I guess, eldership, when I was going through my rough period of life, my midlife crises.
Tell us about that. Oh, I was hoping to hear of some earlier.
Okay, well,
like your family.
So I grew up in Sydney, probably in the lower North Shore, and moved to the northern beaches when I was a teenager.
What did society look like then, where you were born? Because now when I go to Sydney, I see so many different coloured faces, and there's something in my mind. Whereas when I was a kid, I had this impression of who an Aussie was, and it wasn't me. And now that's totally changed.
Wow, yeah.
So how was it when you were growing up?
Well, nowadays, Sydney, I don't recognise it. I'm scared of the place. It's just so different. Whereas in my early 20s, I could drive through every back street, one-way lane of the CBD, knew every parking spot. Now I'd be absolutely lost without Google Maps. And it was very white, Anglo-Saxon, Catholics and Anglicans, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There were immigrants from Europe, Italians and Greeks and stuff like that. And we'd give them we'd tease them, tell jokes about them and everything. And then these guys are now our barristers representing us. They own the fruit shops and the fish and chip shops and everything like that. And then the Asian moves in, and it's just this wonderful melting pot now. But looking back on it, as a white kid of privilege, we were pretty cruel. We were pretty ruthless.
Yeah, I experienced some of that when I was growing up. Yeah. Being immigrants to the country, my mother and father came over here about 19 years of age back in the 50s. I think Mum came in the early 60s. But I grew up in a very working class area, a little bit rougher than most, I'd say.
Whereabouts?
In down what's now called Shell Harbour. So when I grew up, we settled in Shell Harbour Village, the main village on top of the hill, very idyllic place. And when I was about 4 years of age, and went to the local primary school, and then we moved to Mount Warrigal, which is now a suburb of Greater Shell Harbour. And then that's where I spent the rest of my life growing up. I think we were in Barrack Heights for a short time. So these are all suburbs that are nearby. And a majority of the population, well, a big part of the population down there were Anglo people that working in the steelworks, coal mines, all hard-working families around us. But I suppose education level was different, and the people are afraid of something they don't fully understand. So I was the brunt of, your dirty, greasy wog, garlic muncher, and fought a lot in school. Had fist fights on a regular basis. So, I grew up through that, but I don't think that I harbour any sort of damage out of that. I don't reflect on it in a negative way. I really loved school, and I loved growing up where I grew up, and I had good mates and did good things. There was surfing and there was sport of all sorts of, different kinds of sport, and a wonderful lake and beach environment to enjoy. I used to go camping by myself from when I was 13 years of age, with a couple of other mates, of course. And so I reflect on it very well, but I can now see a change. And sometimes I think to myself, when I go down there now, it's like the dirty wogs and how the wogs that are almost admired a little bit, and people can almost envy the culture.
Look at the food that we eat now,
I know,
travel and everything. Yeah. I mean, rock stars nowadays.
Yeah. Everyone wants to be a wog.
Yeah.
But, and then I remember when the Vietnamese and Asian people were coming into the country, and there was sort of, and you know what? There's a geographical move we witnessed from out around Rooty Hill, Cabramatta. A lot of wogs started moving to the North Shore. A lot of them started to move over to Warriewood. Was a hot spot. Warriewood's North Shore, isn't it?
Warriewood's on the northern beaches. Yeah.
So there's a move, and then the Vietnamese people moved in after that, and so they then occupied that space that we used to occupy. I wonder if that's the same now with Arabic people seeking refuge here in this country. It would appear so.
I'd say so.
It would appear they're actually.
And whose turn is it next?
Whose turn is it next? But they're being treated more harshly, aren't they? So there was this because the other immigration events were largely sponsored by the government. And now it appears that we look to the government to make sure our borders are safe and control it very, very tightly. So there is definitely a change. Perhaps it's more harsh these days than it was before. I'm not sure. Sorry, mate, I've gone off on a tangent. We're talking about you growing up in a really white.
Well, so you had not quite, but you had a bit of trauma in your childhood. Yeah, a bit of trauma in my childhood. Yeah, the police came looking for me when I was 12 years of age. They attended on the house. And it was because of violence, and it was because somebody was calling me a dirty wog, and I took umbrage to that, and I exacted my views with fists and smashing the boy's bike. I was 12 years of age. My father was working away at the time. He was working in Canberra and coming home on the weekends, so it was just Mum and I by ourselves during the week. And I remember when the police came to the door, my mother was just in such a state because she saw the police pull up out the front of the house, and she thought that my father had been killed. She could think of no reason why the police would possibly come to our house other than that. That was the only thing in her mind that could possibly be the reason that someone would turn up. She thought if he was in hospital or injured, they would have called her. Yeah.
But there's no reason for police to be turning up. So that was what the mood was like when Mum opened the door. And I didn't think about the police either. I thought it was a school fisticuffs sort of a thing, and I'd had plenty of those, and police never turned up. And so when the police turned up to the door and said, "Oh, we're looking for Mark Savick," my mum turned around. The mood changed wholly, but I think that saved me. It saved my ass, I reckon, because Mum's gone, at least my husband's not dead, and he's not dead. Maybe he should be, but, everything will be okay. And I remember Dad had to pay for the repair of the bike, and that's how things were dealt with. Yeah. So,
there's a bit of a trauma and an experience there in your background, and I'll get to mine in a sec, but it just amazes me how some trauma, some people, it really affects them. Other people are quite resilient, and then you can get the same people and there's a different trauma and they'll respond differently. I was a weedy little kid, and I was a late developer, and I hated that. And I'd never get in fights because I learnt quickly the bigger they are, the harder I fall. So I wouldn't have given you too much stick, mate. But yeah, and I remember I went to a boarding school for a while as a day boy, and I was in the same class as one of our prime ministers, one of our less popular ones, Tony Abbott.
Oh, okay.
And I remember at gym we'd have PE class on Wednesdays, and I dread that because everybody would have a shower afterwards, fully nude, and this must have been at about age 13 or 14.
Right.
And, you know, other guys there have got muscles and hair and what looked like big dongers.
Yeah.
And there was I with a little sort of peewee, you know, with a few other kids.
Oh, wow.
And, wow, that really put a chip on my shoulder about not being good enough and all of that type of stuff.
Okay.
And I had a bit of a loud mouth and everything to go with it.
Yeah.
And the class clown and all of that sort of stuff. I think I had a bit of ADHD. So, yeah, life was pretty good for me until,
what
becoming a
school was it, mate?
teenager. That was Riverview.
Riverview.
Yep. And when my parents moved to the Northern Beaches, my brother stuck on at Riverview all the way through, but I went to the local Catholic school on the hill at Manly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, we can skip my 20s.
Why? Let's not skip your 20s.
Well,
it was uneventful?
I think a really big thing, I'm very passionate about mental health.
Yeah.
And a big thing for me that's had a huge influence on me, I've realised, and I see this in a lot of other people, is who I spend my time with.
Absolutely.
Really, really important. Who influences me and all of that sort of stuff. And in my 20s, I used to go out drinking with a bunch of guys, and we'd see who could score with the most women.
Yeah.
I'd call it sport fucking back then.
Yeah.
And I'm not proud of it now. I'm quite ashamed of it now. And consent laws, or not laws, just the culture and everything is really, really different.
Mm.
So I did that in my 20s, and then I suddenly had a spurt of growing up at about 30, got married, and my career and everything started coming together, and had a couple of twin boys. And I ended up consulting to IT companies who would just specialise in selling to big banks or big retailers like Woolworths.
So,
or
what was your
Coles.
professional qualification? Did you finish
I
year
left
12?
school. No, I left school at 15. Left home at 16.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what did you go to then? Like 15, 16?
I worked in a bank for about 3 years. Dropped out for a couple of years, and then landed on my feet in sales.
Okay.
And went from there.
Okay. So you were consulting for larger sort of purchases with banks?
Well, for large
30s.
IT companies, just approaching a market like that. And I was living in New Zealand at the time, and I'd spent a lot of time back here working, and they'd fly me over to Southeast Asia and do some planning and events and things like that over there. It was a great lifestyle.
How was your social lifestyle? What were your social choices? Were you drinking and taking drugs?
I was drinking probably, I think alcohol is my core drug of addiction. I was taking drugs and other stuff, but they just always really lead me to drinking more.
Yeah, yep.
And it was legal.
Yeah.
But how was my social life? I think I was quite isolated. I mean, I looked really jolly and everything with work, and I'd have lots of acquaintances and contacts.
You were married?
I was married.
And the boys?
And the boys. And I think what happened to me, I've seen happen to a lot of men, is I started out when I got married, and I had close friends of both genders. I had a lot of connection. And we went from there to having my friends and her friends to having our friends. And then we went from having our friends to our friends that she approved of. And we went from there to when the kids came along, I'd outsourced the child minding to her, and she'd outsourced the providing for me. And there was a great partnership. But a thing I didn't realise I was outsourcing was running the social calendar. So if we wanted to get together for a meeting like this, we'd put it in Outlook and schedule it a business meeting or something. But if it was something social, I'll have to check with her. And what happened to me is, for a close, being vulnerable connection, I'd gone from having all these friends and support to having only her to lean on.
Yeah.
And I see that happen with a lot of guys, and that's not who she married. That's not what she signed up for. And we're both wondering why our marriage is falling apart.
Yeah. So, I can relate to that. And a lot of clients that I have, I know that can relate to that too. So you change into something that, and then you wake up realizing that, you ask yourself, how did I get here? How did I get to this
This ain't
spot?
my beautiful house.
No, that's right. It doesn't feel that way, does it?
Yeah. So, I'll work harder, or I'll try harder at this stuff, and it didn't work, and my marriage fell apart, and that was a horrible time for me.
How did your marriage fall apart, mate?
Just through, I guess we drifted apart. We'd compete at things, we'd be passive aggressive, all of that sort of stuff. I think I confided in a drunken moment that I'd had an attraction for someone else but hadn't done anything, and she wanted a trial separation, and then next thing locks are changed and lawyers are called and all of that sort of stuff. And the hardest thing for me was, I had this identity. I was a father and I was a husband, and I was a proud homeowner, had a really nice home, and I was a small business operator. And the next day I was none of those. I mean, I was no longer a father in terms of what I knew fatherhood to be.
Right.
All my parents and everybody else had been married till death do us part. I was the black sheep of the family here. Mm-hmm. So big pressure. I was no longer a husband. That was made quite clear to me. I was no longer a homeowner. They were still asking me to pay for it, but the locks had been changed, and there were some garbage bags outside with my clothes in it. And, I didn't think I wanted, I might have had a small business, but what was the point? That my whole point was to build this whole family thing. And that was really, really tough coming through that identity crisis.
How old were the boys when this happened?
6.
Okay.
So it gets worse. So I looked up all sorts of support and everything like that. I think I did a pretty good job. And I found a men's group that I went to in Auckland for 3 months. And that really, really helped me to realise that it wasn't all just me. It wasn't a huge failure. It happens to a lot of people, and that sometimes shit happens. Mm. And then, as I said, I got a new girlfriend, so I didn't need that shit anymore.
Right.
And from there, after that, I started drinking a little bit more, and then a lot more. And I'd have a lot of depression and anxiety. And what I didn't realise, I had this mental illness coming up in the background. And it got to the stage I was living in a hotel in the Auckland CBD, quite a nice hotel, the Key West there.
Not working?
And I just sort of given up work.
Right, so no motivation. So this is the depression.
This is the depression and the alcohol, the self-medication.
And that's not helping. The alcohol doesn't help the depression, does it?
Yeah, and because I wasn't connecting with anybody, I'd see the kids every weekend or second weekend, but I was just really, really isolating. So I'd start having some pretty crazy thoughts, and the only person I had to bounce those thoughts off with was myself. And what made a lot of sense to me was that my family, the world, everybody would be better off if I was no longer around. Uh-huh. And so I'd talk to myself about that, and I'd confirm it. Yeah, that's true, rather than, come on, mate.
Okay.
And so that was, and this is quite common. I now do training in suicide prevention and in suicide intervention. And it's quite a common thing among people with suicide thoughts, this altruistic thing that the world or others, my family, my loved ones would all be better off without me. And that's true now. I get to use these same altruistic, the world, my family, my loved ones can be better off, but not if I take myself out of the picture, but maybe if I do some other stuff. So I'm glad I've been able to carry that forward. So I made quite a long-term plan, and I'm still here, so it didn't work. And with all of that, I went bankrupt, and my brother came and bailed me out and flew me back to Australia, and my new life began. And that was great. I went to a psychiatric hospital in Canberra, and I got diagnosed with bipolar, axis 2, cluster B. I think there's a personality disorder thrown in there. And I thought, oh, great, because I was worried I had a drinking problem. But no, I had a mental illness, and I had some new mood-stabilising medication.
Is it a mental illness? Like sometimes I think that the labels on mental illness are not accurate. So, for example, autism or schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more accurate to say that autism is a word that represents a certain amount of perhaps behavioural issues, but they can be different. So one person that's diagnosed with autism and another person diagnosed with autism may have very, very different behaviours manifesting and a very different condition to one another. However, they put it in the box as autism. And it occurred to me that sometimes I think they're just diagnosing people for being people. They've just diagnosed you for being they've just diagnosed Tim. This is Tim. And then there's some medication, some treatment to bring it back to a box that they call normal, or there's some normal parameters of behaviour. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, autism's a little bit different. That's something I'm learning about at the moment, because the Complete Men Foundation, we run some dads groups for Autism Camps Australia. So, and my understanding is that autism's not considered a mental illness. It's a developmental condition on the neurotypical spectrum, whatever that means. And it's quite a different kettle of fish. But mental illness, labels. I remember being in a psychiatric hospital and hearing people talking about being on, 6 or 8 different medications and everything. And I'm going, they may as well throw all the pills in a big bowl and we all have a go for all the good they're doing.
Tim, that is so true.
The label of being diagnosed bipolar really helped me. That helped me with a new identity. There was a reason perhaps for why I'd wanted to take my own life and why I'd flushed my old life down the toilet, and there was hope for a new start. I no longer use that label, but it was very handy for me at the time. Another label I no longer use is alcoholic, but I stood up sometimes a few times a day for a couple of years at many, many different AA meetings on the Gold Coast saying, "Hi, I'm Tim and I'm an alcoholic." And that label really, really helped me. Okay. Nowadays I'm sober, or I just don't drink.
What did your drinking look like at its worst, Tim?
So I liked the wine, and I remember one night I was really careful. All this stuff I didn't know I was doing, I found out at AA hearing other people talking about them doing it. But I'd probably go and visit a bottle shop about 5 or 6 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always go to a different one, like the person behind the counter cares, but I was a bit embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And I was really careful not to buy too much, because I knew it'd just sort of kill me. There'd be no stopping. So I'd want to buy also in a quantity where I'd get good value. And I remember one night I'm sitting there with, I had 3 bottles of wine, and don't ask me why, they were all in the fridge, but that makes sense. And I'd had about half. I was just at home on my own, and I rarely went out drinking because I knew I'd just end up in trouble, whether it was drink driving or, in a fight or just whatever. So I'd drink at home on my own, and I'd drunk about half a bottle of white wine, and I'm thinking, I got a little buzz now. I feel pretty good. I don't have to drink anymore. I could go to bed and I could sleep and I could wake up fresh tomorrow. Wouldn't that be awesome? Yeah, that feels really good. I'm just going to have one more glass and just have one more. And that's pretty awesome. And yeah, look, I haven't even had a bottle. I'll just have one more. Anyway, I wake up the next morning and all 3 bottles are gone and I'm feeling pretty bloody miserable. I found out later in AA that's just typical. I thought I understood addiction because I'd been a smoker. And my brother had been a heroin addict for a while in his late teens, early 20s. And I could see him, if he didn't have his stuff, he'd be really hanging out. Yeah. And if I didn't have a cigarette after a couple of hours, I'd be getting angry and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas alcohol, I could go a week or 2 without it.
Yeah.
There were many times either I got sick or I'd pushed it too hard or there was an event coming along that I couldn't do it and I'd have no problem. So I can't be addicted. What I didn't realise was that with smoking, when the nicotine level goes down, that's when the craving kicks in. With alcohol, flat, no real cravings. I might like a drink, but the craving kicks in once I've had 1 or 2. Thus the saying, one's too many and 100's not enough. And I'd go, if we went out and had lunch after this today and I was still drinking, you'd probably have a glass of wine and maybe, or 1 or 2 and maybe leave, a little bit left. And I'm like, why? And then somebody would say, let's have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And I'm going, fuck no, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
So the actual craving kicks in when the drinking starts.
I had a mate that I used to go to lunch with. Unfortunately, he's not very well and I haven't seen him in some time. But a really lovely man, really good heart. And I remember you'd go to lunch and you'd get up to leave the lunch table and he would drink the remains of everybody else's drink on the table while standing beside the table.
Yeah.
In a full restaurant, he didn't care.
Yeah.
And he'd scull like little bits of wine out of the,
it's
out of the
sacrilege
glass
to waste that.
Not wasting it, yeah.
Yeah. How can you do that?
How old were you when you gave up smoking, mate?
I like the quote from Mark Twain, giving up smoking's easy. I should know I've done it thousands of times.
Yes.
Probably the big one was I wasn't smoking when I quit drinking, but I picked up smoking just to fit in at AA and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay.
But so I've been sober 12 years, so off the smokes for probably about 10.
I gave up about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
The cigarettes. Same as you. I gave up many, many times. And my drive to give up, it was, I remember the day, I can see it's like, I can picture it in my mind. My oldest son, he was 16 and I saw him with a cigarette, a rolly cigarette.
Yep.
And and he was doing exactly what I was doing. And he was sitting in exactly the place I used to sit and do it in, out in the back veranda. And so I said to him, I apologised to him. I said, I'm really sorry, son, for what I've done here. But all I can do now is bloody give up and try to give another example. It took me 18 months. I used those vapes that you put the oil in and then you had to back then you had to buy the nicotine from New Zealand. You had to order it out of New Zealand and then you had to mix it with this oil that you get from one of these vape shops, and then you got this machine that's like $200 or $300, and then that machine needs maintenance. It's almost like a car. It needs oil changed and coils changed and all sorts of things scrubbed and cleaned, and it's got to be repowered. So it's a burden, and then you got to carry it around. And some of these things are quite large, or quite bulky back then, and you blow out smoke, and it's like the smoke was that thick, or the vapor, then you blow it out. I couldn't see you. So when I was watching television, I used to like being able to blow the vapor out so it would extinguish the television. Couldn't see the TV. It sort of impressed me. It gave me some sort of satisfaction. I thought you could save an old fridge box, an old cardboard fridge box, and right on the side of it, come and meet the dragon, $5. and you just sit in that box with a hole, blowing it out, the kids would be lined up for a mile, right? So I thought that would be something to do. Anyway, 18 months, during that 18 months, I slowly decreased the amount of nicotine so that I was cutting out the physical addiction, because that was the main thing for me, was the physical addiction to nicotine. Along that journey, I poisoned myself twice because I miscalculated with the amount of drops. And back then, because some of these vape shops were bottling their own juice or whatever they call it, it's a glycerin-based liquids, all different flavours, popcorn, passion fruit, you name it. You got all sorts of different flavours. So it tastes heaps better than cigarettes, and you're blowing out heaps more smoke. So these things are going all right. And it creates a bit of warmth too. You can adjust them so that it creates warmth on your lips as you inhale them. And it's because they used to bottle their own. Some of them didn't put the amount that was in the bottle, like how many mils was in that bottle. You sort of just knew from the size of the bottle, that's a 200 mil or that's 150 mil, and then that takes so many drops in it. So I'd made a mistake. I thought a 200 mil bottle was a 350 mil bottle, and I put the nicotine in it.
Too much nicotine. Oh.
And so I poisoned myself twice with nicotine. I think they were two really important events to show me how dangerous this drug was. Do you know that they conduct chemical warfare experiments using nicotine? Nicotine is one of the most deadly substances on the planet.
Wow.
It's really poisonous. So the first time it happens, I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling nauseous. I was sort of sweating. I had diarrhea. General feeling of unwellness. So I called the chemist, and I knew the chemist quite well, and I said, "Look, mate, it's Mark here. I've got these symptoms. What do you think's going on?" He goes, "Sounds like food poisoning to me." And I went, okay. He says, what have you eaten anything different in your diet? And I said, well, I was at the servo like 2 days ago, and I got a lettuce and chicken sandwich. And he goes, that'll be it. He goes, and guess what? It's always the lettuce. He goes, it's always the lettuce. So I go, okay. And then a bit later in the day, I thought, I'll do some research, the Google thing. And somewhere it came up, nicotine poisoning. So then I rang the guy at the vape shop, and I said, hey, Jerry,
your local dealer?
Yeah, my local bloke. I said, mate, what does this sound like? And I went through the symptoms, and he goes, oh, fuck, you've poisoned yourself, mate. And I told him, and he goes, oh, no. He says, see, because you've put extra drops in there, but you've also taken extra out of that, it sort of compounds it, like it makes it worse. And those 2 times I poisoned myself accidentally, I think really drove home, hey, this is not something you want to have in your body. You just don't want to. And then it took me 3 months on zero to get rid of the device altogether. And I haven't looked back. Do you still think about having a smoke?
Every now and then, yeah.
Do you ever dream about having a smoke?
No.
Okay.
No. Do you?
I've dreamt about having a smoke a couple of times, and it's like a nightmare. I wake up in the morning and I swear I can taste it, and I swear that it actually happened, and it's really highly repulsive to me. But in my everyday life, or when I have a drink, and I love a glass of wine and a cocktail, don't feel like it at all. The smell I find quite repulsive. And after I'd given up for a couple of years, I'd walk down the street and there'd be somebody smoking. You'd have to walk through a cloud of smoke. And I'd hold my breath, and I'd feel a little bit disgusted and a little bit annoyed.
Smell it on your clothes later.
Yeah, that I have to suffer it. It didn't feel good. And then this all changed. This is like a radical change for me. It was only about a week or two ago. I'm driving back from Brisbane, and I stop at a pedestrian crossing here in Runaway Bay. And this fellow comes walking across the pedestrian crossing, and he had a tank top on and shorts, and it looked like he was heading over to the pub. And he was well groomed, and he was smoking a cigarette as he's walking across the crossing. And I saw him, he'd blow half the smoke out and then suck it back in. So he said this white cloud, like it was really professional, and it was really. He wasn't ashamed of what he's doing at all. He's having a smoke, and
he made it look cool.
He was enjoying it. It wasn't like the 3 people huddled around a bin outside an office, And it was like seeing a unicorn or koala crossing the road, it was because you don't see many people
No.
smoking these days, and especially carrying themselves like that. And I thought, wow, this is like something historical that you wouldn't mind your kids to witness. And you'd say, hey, that's what the past used to look like,
Yeah.
So I've got a change of mind now too. I'm not finding it offensive. I sort of feel, I wish everybody'd give up for their own health.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's just, as you know, the difference it makes to all sorts of things.
It's interesting. I can walk past someone smoking and quite enjoy the aroma now, but at first it was like, ugh. But the dreaming about it, I did quite a few. I did AA and I did Smart Recovery and I did a few NA meetings and stuff like that. And it'd be quite common for people to talk about dreams in early recovery. I think I had them for about the first year. And the worst part was I'd wake up just terrified that I'd had a drink because I'd been dreaming about it, and I'd be half awake. I don't know if I was half awake or still dreaming, but the next big thing was, am I going to tell anybody about it?
Right.
Do I go back and count my sobriety again? Do I start again? And then I'd go, oh, thank God it was only a dream.
Yeah.
And that's quite a common thing too.
So you had shame.
Huge shame.
Okay.
Huge shame with it, yeah.
Maybe that's an indicator for us of things that we shouldn't be doing. If you're feeling shame, maybe you need to have a close look at what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's another example of who I hang out with is really important. So, hanging around all those people in early recovery, well, they weren't in early recovery, I was. In my period of early recovery, I would have been very ashamed to say to them, hey, I relapsed,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that shame actually worked in a really, really positive way.
And so you've given up smoking, you gave up drinking, and now with Complete Men, how old were you when you set Complete Men up? And you went through some training with the Mankind Project as well, didn't you, Tim?
Yeah, well, I first, when I ended up in the psychiatric hospital, and I've been to a few for depression and bipolar and everything like that, and sure, I get a bit depressed every now and then, but I'm not on any medication or anything like that. I think that label helped me at the time. But I'd end up in a psychiatric hospital, and suddenly what I'd done, trying to take my life, the way I abused drugs and alcohol and everything, was suddenly not shameful. It was everybody got it. And rather than hiding things, I could open up a bit. And I was always amazed by people who could talk about things I found quite shameful and talk openly about it, and thought, I'd like to do that. So I came across groups there, and a few years down the track, I finally realised, I went to a men's group thing and hung out with some guys, and I just noticed how differently they drank from me. It was one of the rare men's groups events where there was alcohol, and I just went, I think I'd been to an AA meeting while I'd been in, because a lot of the psychiatric hospitals, they have the mad, bad and the sad.
Well, I haven't heard that expression before.
Well, the bad are the people getting off alcohol or drugs.
Right.
The sad are the people with mood disorders, and the mad are the people with, psychosis, and a lot of them are interlinked. So I'd always go in to the sad ward and hang out with the bad people.
Okay.
And I'd been to a couple of meetings there because they wanted me to see what it was like. And I just thought, it's time. And went to my first AA meeting and haven't had a drink since. And through all of that, I was wanting more than, I was just outgrowing the identification of I've had an addiction. And I was looking at getting involved in men's groups again because it had helped me in Auckland, and I couldn't find one. And actually this was while I was still drinking, but I couldn't find one. And there were ones where you could pay some money, and I didn't have any money. Or there were ones where we meet once a month, but no, I need something this week. Or where we're not taking on new fellas. We're a closed group. We're halfway through a thing. We've got an intake next year or next quarter. Might have been next century as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
And I was really keen for something like I'd experienced in Auckland. So that was probably, again, about, a bit after my suicide behaviour. So that was probably about, 13 or 14 years ago. And I eventually got involved in some good groups, and I'd always wanted to have something like that available for guys where and when they needed it. So started off with a little thing called Complete Men. It was just trading myself as an ABN, and with some other guys, some very experienced guys, and we sort of started to go our own ways. They were sort of wanting to do courses where guys paid money, and we put together about 10 of them, and they were very successful. But I was really trying to help guys through a difficult period of life, help them change what their expectations, change their identity, give them some inspiration and hope. So at the end of, I think it was 2016, I opened up a group in Robina with another guy who was an elder in the men's community. And that group's still going today. I was there last night. There were 15 blokes sitting around in the circle. And
I've sent a couple of my clients along to the men's group as well. And It's been, part of the reason has been exactly what you have said. The groups have already commenced courses, or they haven't got any room, and there's a whole range of reasons. And you were very open to providing a service on a regular basis, and so I was able to get clients to slot in straight away, in a matter of a couple of days, and it's had outstanding results. I mean, these people. Well, one in particular, a client of mine in particular, and I know he wouldn't mind me sharing this. He's learned a lot through the group. He and his partner had a falling out, and there was allegations made by both parties, but what it resulted in was an apprehended domestic violence order imposed by the court as a result of a police application to the court. And that
we never see many of those in the men's group. Just kidding.
Exactly.
Yep.
So he was prevented from living in the matrimonial home. So it was him, his partner, and their young child. And so he had to live elsewhere, and he ended up living at home with mum and dad. And mum and dad were very supportive of him going through a process. And he did have some anxiety and depression issues for which he was medicated. And so I was unable to get him into any course at all. And there's some that are recommended by the court. And then I turned to you, and he came to the course, and he attended, I think, 4 or 5 weeks in a row. And then the next court date came up, and you provided me with a letter just saying that he had attended and participated. And then I provided the court with an outline of exactly who the group was. I downloaded it off the internet to show the court what he'd been engaged in. But what struck me most is that after about the 3rd or 4th time that he'd been into the men's group, I called him, and his voice had changed. I could sense a total change in his voice, and it was like that. It was like he'd taken a big breath and breathed out something that had been keeping him tense and agitated, and I don't know, in a state of trauma, just in a very negative state. And so he was reacting poorly to normal things, just normal things that would occur in daily life would tip him over the edge this way or that way. So the work that he was doing with the men's group, it resulted, and this is, I'll tell you about another client who'd been there, same result. It's like an acceptance of responsibility, and that acceptance of responsibility, they realise, puts them in a place of power as well. And it's
no longer a victim.
No longer a victim.
Yeah, I've got choices.
Yep, exactly. And I can do certain things. I can make certain decisions. And the situation that I was in, I have to take responsibility for my role and address that. And once I address that, it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. It's going to be the right outcome. And for both of these clients, the outcome was that they're both with their families now, raising their kids. They send me photos regularly. Another client that I had, the similar story, and as a result of going to those men's groups at Robina, he was able to go to the birth of his first child, which the ADVO prevented him from doing prior to attending the men's group and going to the court. And the court made pretty strict orders that he was not allowed to be around his partner unless she gave permission, and that had to be in writing. It could be a text message, but it had to be in writing. And he was desperately wanted to be at the birth of that first child, and desperately wanted to be a father, and was very remorseful for his part in the whole situation. And he came out of that courtroom happy with that outcome, happy that he'd done the work, happy that there'd been a little bit of recognition. And it was only a matter of some days after that she did give him permission to come to the birth, which he attended and did with grace and, accepting responsibility. And not long after that, I'm getting pictures of happy family on the beach, and they've moved into a new place, and he's a loving father. He's working full time. He's supporting his family, and he keeps on going to the men's group because he says it's just it's changed his life. And again, I heard the change in the tone of voice.
Fantastic,
so, excellent results. So that's why I'm keen to have that link there. I think a lot of people will benefit from that. I hope you're going to be able to handle it.
Well, I'd love to talk about the men's groups, and we will, but let's just talk about Mark Savick Legal at the moment, because my impressions of the legal system, I guess, of someone like you is what I'm expecting, and I've been blown away with our connection, is someone who's billing hundreds of dollars an hour, and I'm never going to get to talk to you. It's billed in 6-minute blocks, and I've just read the stories in the press of law firms who I won't name, but where no win, no fee, and we're going to send you a Christmas card, and that's $45,
Yeah.
Or to let you know, our change of address is $73. Wow. And what I noticed with you, and just watching the first podcast, is how much you care about your clients, and you see the good in them, and the bad, because, I've got a really great man in me. I've also got a fucking monster.
Oh, absolutely.
I have never killed anybody, but gee, I've felt like it.
Yep.
And I'm really lucky a few times in my life that I haven't ended up on the foul side of the law. But yeah, I just really see that you care, and we've had quite a few chats, and you've always got time to listen, and you're always, I know you must be good at doing all the law precedents and all that other stuff that, and yes, Your Honour, that you have to do, but just how much you care about these people and go into their background and look at everything behind that's caused it, and just presenting that case. That's amazing. Plus, what you do with your charity work.
Yeah, I think that is in large part, like in one part, it's my nature. In another part, it's because I've surrounded myself with good men.
Yeah.
Who have been able to teach me some lessons about my responsibilities in the community as a man. So being alert to things that are going on around you and tuning into your community so that you see opportunities to assist where you can, as much as you can. Some people have a much greater capacity and some people a lesser capacity. Simple example is I travel to Brisbane on the train when I go to attend court in Brisbane. And the last time I went on the train, one of the services was cancelled. So there was twice as many people getting on the train at the train station at Helensvale. And so all of the seats were sort of occupied once we got to the next stop. And then I observed ladies getting on, elderly people getting on. And I was thinking, I wonder how some of these young people are going to react to this. Now, most people were totally isolated because they've got their ear pods on, they've got their phone, and it's a barrier between them and their community, which is a shame. And that shows you the strength of corporations that have actually created a barrier between human beings and their community. Is quite frightening, and I think will have long-lasting, ramifications. But what I did see was a couple of young guys get up and ask quite confidently, "Would you like a seat?" And that offer then to be accepted. And I could see other guys that maybe, and I'm just speculating, would like to do that, would like to show that they care about their community and make that offer, but are probably too afraid to do so because they're not sure whether it'll be accepted or it won't be, and they feel that maybe I could get embarrassed here. I don't think it's about, oh, this is my seat and I don't care about you. I don't think that that's the case, maybe in a very rare circumstance. And it was, so that sort of shows that some people have the capacity to help more than others do. So I've got a bit of capacity in that area, and so that's where I chose to put it. But it's mostly, I think, a result of being involved with really good men. I started skydiving back in 2011 with a group of really good guys in Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. And one of the guys was involved with an organisation called the Mankind Project. So it's an international organisation, and he ended up being the head of Mankind Project in the Southern Hemisphere. Stephen Hill is his name, incredible skydiver, and has been a very good friend of mine. And I continue to do work with him from time to time. But they showed me about the importance of taking responsibility, the importance of looking after your community, a whole range of behavioural traits that I did learn from them. About being very honest is another part. And so that was a big part of it. And then the other part of it is that, much to my detriment, and is that I am not financially motivated. So if I have to get up out of bed in the morning for the sole purpose of making money, I can't last very long. I become really despondent, depressed. I was angry because my time's being used for something that, I don't see much value in. And then the actual money, which provides you with capacity to make certain decisions, it doesn't satisfy me. So I need something else to satisfy me. And the criminal law has given me the capacity to help my community a lot more than I perhaps could in some other field. And I'm usually doing legal aid work, and I've always found that it's a massive privilege to be able to do the work that we do as lawyers. We're very trusted. In court, we have a role to play that's extremely important, and it's part of the mechanism to make sure things go well. So all of those things coupled together, I think, sort of result in me taking a bit more of a personal interest. And I have most of my clients here on the Gold Coast, I'd be happy to have live next door to me. I'd be happy to enjoy a drink and a meal with them. I'd be happy for to be associated with many of the clients that I do have. Many of the clients that I have are in a position that is not a result of being evil or nasty or malicious. It's a result of other things. And sometimes those things can be corrected. And here's something else that's interesting too that I see in our profession. I think there's a perception that it's a sort of win and lose type of environment.
Black and white.
You win the case or you lose the case. You win the case. Did you win? Did you lose? Whereas it really is sort of on a spectrum. There's an outcome to the matter. And so you're trying to apply yourself to get the best possible outcome in the matter. The best outcome for your client, the best outcome for the community, the best outcome for that person's family, the best outcome in the judicial system so that it's a safe decision. There's a whole range of things to be considered to get the best outcome. And sometimes for a certain client, the best outcome is to face the responsibility, and they want to enter a guilty plea. They want to sign a document. I've had clients that after that I've had and I've interviewed them, and at the end of that interview process, I could identify 2 or 3 possible defences in the matter, and they flatly refuse to pursue that angle, and they want to sign a document saying that I've explained all of that to them. However, they want to enter a plea of guilty because that's their pathway to healing themselves is through facing the responsibility, then making up for it, and then they can re-enter the community with their heads held up high. There was an incident in Broome that I was told about. I didn't witness this, but I was told about by an elder, a lady elder in Broome, and this was in 1995. And then there was a young Aboriginal man who entered into the conversation, and he also added more to it. And this was what this was about. Sorry if I get some of the facts a little incorrect. Okay. It's been many years, but you'll get the guts of it. So there was an Aboriginal man in one of the communities, and he was driving a motor vehicle drunk, and he had an accident. And as a result of that accident, there was a young girl that was killed. So he was then sent to jail. I don't know how long he served in jail and what he was exactly charged with. It would have been some sort of dangerous driving resulting in death. And he served that time in jail. And then when he came out of jail, the community organised for an event, and the event was attended by the police and by the ambulance and by all the Aboriginal elders on the local sporting field. And the women of the community lined up and made a gauntlet. You know, you've got to go through the gauntlet. Mm-hmm. So they lined up in 2 rows, all armed with sticks and quite heavy pieces of timber. And he had to walk from one end to the other. And as he walked, they belted that guy so badly that he couldn't make it through. And he was laying on the ground, broken and bleeding and cut. And then the women came and healed him. So they then took him back to the community, and they healed him and gave him the medicine and dressed his wounds. And after that process, he then could then walk in the community again with his head held up high.
Wow.
So he needed the process in order to heal properly.
Yeah.
And I see that reflected in some of the cases that I have.
Yeah. Wow.
And sometimes the judicial system deprives people of that opportunity because, you know, a lawyer that is talking about let's win, let's lose, whatever, can often miss that very important element. And so you need to listen to these people.
That's huge. That really, really touched me. Brought a tear to my eye hearing that story just when you got to the healing part. And I don't know much about the judicial system, but I do come across a lot of men who are very frustrated with it and often feel that the system's against them and everything like that. And a classic example is a guy comes into our men's group and he's talking about how he can't see his kid and how unfair it is and all of that sort of stuff. And we often we have 2 halves to our men's group, and in the second half, some of the guys will come in and share about what's going on at the moment, and generally all the new guys go into that component, and the other guys who aren't running anything particularly big that week will come in and do a process. We'll explore some area of personal growth. Well, in one of these what's going on sessions, this guy was really quite angry and trying to get us to buy into his story about, you know, what this is a harsh word, but what a victim he was, how unfair the system was to him. And he pulled out his phone, which is sort of a bit of a no-no. We go technology free, but you go, but no, look, this is what I got from her lawyer, and this is how I replied, and they wouldn't accept that. So this is what I sent to my lawyer, and then this, and then this, and then this. And we let him go for a while. And I think I came in with, and I see you're angry. Oh, I'm not fucking angry. Look at this injustice. So what happened next is, you know, once he'd finished is I started, and then a few other guys started telling their story of how it was for them. And, you know, I might have shared that sometimes I was angry. Sometimes I was really, really fair and really wanted to do the right thing. And other times I was really angry at myself and so depressed I couldn't get out of bed for a day, or drinking myself stupid. And what it really was, it wasn't that I was angry, it was I was hurt. And just shared about being hurt. And I'm a man, I'm not supposed to feel hurt, you know, but I'm hurting. And that's when I sort of found the men's group really handy, to hear other guys share their stories of how they hurt and how it didn't kill them and they got through it. And, so he heard my little bit and then another 3 guys. And in the end, he goes, I'm fucking hurting. And just broke down. And it was just beautiful. What a wonderful piece of healing. I'm hurting. Big switch from, but this is what she said and all of that sort of stuff.
That's right. Yeah, I'm constantly seeing that. So I'm constantly trying to refocus people on the actual issue at hand, because sometimes their focus is very broad and they start talking about what happened several years ago, who said what she said, what she's done in the past.
Yeah.
What she's done to me. It's that victim.
My partner's a narcissist, all of that stuff, yeah. So another thing sometimes we might look at in our men's group, I said, that's the open sharing. Sometimes we'll do what's called a process, or we'll look at an area of personal growth. And a favourite of mine is, I've used the word victim a few times, and I'm still a victim sometimes. I get up and I rant about how things are wrong or they should be. But what I've learnt from a great book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson.
I haven't read it.
It's a short little book, well worth a read. And he talks about blame versus responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so you're in law. So if here's a quick law quiz. So if I park my car down there in your car park and someone backs into it, and hopefully there's cameras down there to capture who it is if they piss off, who's responsible for paying to fix my car?
You'd imagine the person who reversed into your car, the person
Fantastic.
who owns that vehicle, their insurance provider would be paying for the damage to your car.
Fantastic. So it's a bunch of 13-year-olds who've stolen a car, high on drugs, wards of the state or whatever. Their parents they haven't got parents to pay. Who's responsible now for paying to fix my car? Who's to
the children are operating the car. So if the children are over the age of 10,
yep,
they can face criminal responsibility if they
but
can
who's
be
going
shown.
to pay for my car?
I'm thinking this through. You give me a quiz.
Yep.
So up until the age of 14, the police have to provide some proof that they knew the difference between good and bad and what they had done is wrong or not, because there's a special legal defence between ages of 10 and 14. And if they can show that, well, then they are responsible for the damage to your car. But as you said, they've got no money.
They've got no money.
So the mechanism that we have set up in Australia is that you would have insurance and that your insurer would pay for the car. And that's out of a common fund, and you would contribute what they call an excess.
And if I didn't have insurance, I'd end up paying. So
that's it.
So they're to blame.
Yes.
And I'm responsible. And in the first one, they're to blame, they're responsible. And the third one is, there's a knock on the door at home and there's a little baby in the basket and a little note saying, please look after me. Am I to blame? No. But am I responsible?
Yes.
Hell yes. Am I responsible to look after this kid till they're 18? No. But I'm responsible to take it to maybe the local police
to make
station,
sure it doesn't die,
or the community health centre, or the hospital, or somewhere, and that's my responsibility. So blame is all about the past.
Yep.
And responsibility is looking ahead in the future. So in the men's group, we'll look at where am I blaming and avoiding responsibility, because where I'm blaming,
that's
I'm
such
a
lovely,
victim.
simple way of looking at it, Tim.
It's even better in the book.
Fantastic. Oh, that's from the book.
Yeah.
What's the book again?
The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
By Mark Manson. And the difference between blame and responsibility. And blame is all about the past. And do I want to live there, or do I want to live, in the present and the future? And that's where responsibility. And it took me a long time to get that. But if it's who I hang around with. If I'm with a bunch of 6 blokes and we're all owning our bit, blokes can get quite competitive. Oh, well, I really mucked up here, and it's just awesome.
Yeah,
brings me a
right.
lot of joy doing that stuff.
That's good.
And I'll remember never to ask those hypothetical legal questions to a lawyer again. I normally just get a simple yes or no.
Oh, no. The time of yes and no answers is long behind me, I think.
So I could talk a little bit about what's different about men, or what draws me to work with men. But, one of the things, I guess, is that I believe from the statistics in Australia, as well as particularly in the USA, men have a much higher incarceration rate. And there are some other statistics that some people who work actively on behalf of men say, you know, they generally get tougher sentences and things like that. And I've got my theories as to why that is at a men's level rather than at a cultural sort of level. But I'm just interested, do you concur with those statistics? And is your client base 50% gender-based, or do men get caught more? Or
my client base would currently my client base would reflect more than 90% men.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, more than 90% men. And that's been the case ever since I practiced criminal law. It's mostly been men. When I was doing some juvenile criminal law, I think that there was more of an equal representation of boys and girls.
Okay.
But still a lot more boys. And then I've worked with the Aboriginal Legal Service in New South Wales and the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Legal Service here in Queensland. And predominantly men. Unfortunately, women and kids are represented disproportionately to the remainder of our community as well. But, you know, that's a complex issue we could have another episode about.
Well, I can't really talk about statistics and everything like that, but just from my own personal experience, and this is a personal opinion, but I think a few other people agree with it, is that the fundamental difference, I think, between men and women, and this is a big, broad generalisation, it doesn't fit everybody, but generally when the going gets tough and it gets challenging, women generally tend to want to talk about stuff and communicate with each other. And blokes, when the going gets tough and challenging, blokes want to fix it. Don't want to talk about it. I just want to fix it. So great. If it's a lawnmower or a computer, I can fix it. I've got that Kia down there. I can't service that, but I can outsource it. I can earn some money and I can fix that and get that serviced and keep it under warranty. But when it comes to problems or challenges in my personal life, in my family, in my blind spots, in my addictions and things like that, often my really well-intentioned attempts to fix things end up a fucking disaster.
Yeah.
And so what do? I certainly don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to talk about how I feel. I don't know how I feel, but what I'm feeling is shame. I'm no good. I'm not good enough. This has happened to me. It doesn't happen to other people. Then I might be feeling a bit of anger and blaming the system or blaming people or blaming the government or whatever it is. But the big thing I'm feeling, if it's shame, is I want to hide it. I want to cover it. I'll just wear a mask. How you going, Tim? All good?
Yeah.
You know? Whereas women have that wonderful outlet of talking to each other about it.
Do you also think that the roles of men and women are ingrained such that men are more likely to commit a criminal offence in the attempt to satisfy their perceived responsibility? So if there's hard times afoot, is it more likely that a man will go out and steal something for a financial reward, or to steal something such as food or something else that is needed by the family? More likely to do that because they're a man and they have an idea that it's their responsibility and the crime they're committing is just an attempt to fix it?
Well, I guess that depends on the person. I don't want to generalise about men, but I'll talk about me. I said in my marriage, I outsourced the child minding, and I did a bit of that, but she was the boss of it, and she outsourced the provision to me, and she'd do some stuff and bring some income in. And if my kids were starving, I'd steal. If my kids were starving, I'd keep them alive. I'd keep my family and my partner and everything alive. So, yeah, guilty as charged, Your Honour.
And the laws are such now that you wouldn't get sent to jail for that.
Uh-huh.
So there's some compassion extended where people are stealing food to subsist. You know?
In the old days, you get sent to Botany Bay.
Yeah, in the old days, you go for a real big holiday.
A loaf of bread.
How old are your boys now?
29.
They're 29. How are they doing?
So I have one son who I'm really proud of. He's on the NDIS and he has schizophrenia. And he's gone from a promising young man to a really lost. He lived with me and had late onset. His first episode was about 5 years ago when he was 24. And we've got him on the NDIS. And we've got him on a disability pension. He's been an involuntary patient, which my son and I both agree is, it was horrific to go through, but is a really, really good thing now. Big gratitude towards Queensland Health. And he's now got a job that's organised through the NDIS people. He's working as a researcher and software developer on an artificial intelligence project at Griffith Uni,
Wow.
just 5 hours a week. He's now sharing a flat with another guy who's on the NDIS at that Smith Collective, Legoland.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a fantastic facility.
And he's, just grown 3 feet in stature. And I am such a proud dad.
Unreal. And the other boy?
My other son's 29. He's a software developer in Auckland, and he's not talking to me at the moment.
Okay.
And that hurts.
Okay.
And again, in taking responsibility rather than blame and telling a story about him, I think I was estranged from my dad and my parents for a couple of years. And I'm just hoping and trusting that that's a stage he's going through.
Yeah.
And there's something about his relationship with me and maybe my past behaviour that's a bit too painful for him to talk to me at the moment. And the other thing, the other amazing thing is how well I get on with his mum. So my son with the schizophrenia wouldn't talk to his mum for a couple of years, and I was just amazed that that woman phoned me every week to see how he was doing with all her hurt.
Yeah.
And I was able to support her and suggest she writes letters and does things like that. So I send my son, she's very supportive, tells me what he's doing, and I send him an email every 2 weeks. And I make sure I haven't got, it'd be really nice to see you, or I hope I take all that out and just tell him a bit about what's going on for me or with his brother or in the world and that sort of stuff. And I'm trusting.
Yeah, that's I like that. I just want to let you know a couple of things that have been important for me as a dad with my boys, and something that I just so highly recommend to every father. I think it's the greatest gift that I've given my kids. So I've got 3 boys, 21, 17 and 14, and they're all incredible young men that are really well engaged, and the young fella's a bit naughty, but he's showing some great responsibility at the moment, and the biggest gift I've ever got them is engaging them with nature. So I had a process for the 2 older boys, because my ex-wife and we separated at a time when Luca was 1 or 2, he was very, very little. He missed this first part, and it's reflected in his growing up. I think I've got him back now. But it's reflected in his growing up, because when we separated, Georgina moved here to the Gold Coast with the boys. She had a lot of family supports, work opportunities and things. And she moved here to the Gold Coast. And then Luca didn't have me there to do what I did with the other 2. So with the other 2 boys, we lived in Tamworth. And I'm very much an outdoors person, so I had the big 4-wheel drive, and I'd go hunting, and I'd go collecting my own firewood, and so I'd have them with me from when they were very small, out just wandering in the bush. And then when they're 3 years of age, I'd take them individually to a camp place out near Tamworth called Warrabar, and it's the top of the Namoy River. I think it's called the McDonald, and then it becomes the Namoy. And it's a chain of beautiful rock pools in granite, and it's just beautiful scenery, lovely fish to catch up there. It's really pristine environment. You can drink the water straight out of the stream. It's lovely. And I'd set up a very basic camp, throw a little trap in the water, fishing rod, swag, fire, and just watch the boy engage with the environment. So he pulls that trap in every 2 seconds, and if he catches a little shrimp, then I'll put him on a hook and chuck it out. And it doesn't matter what he catches, the fish that he catches, he wants it roasted on the fire. Roast it on the fire, you let him pick at it with a stick. Sleeps with you in the big swag, wakes up at night, can feel he's safe with you, sees the stars, goes back to sleep. You just follow them around for 2 days. I just have 2 nights and 2 days with them and just follow them around. It's just affected their whole lives. They don't have screens in front of them. They want to be engaged with nature. They want to be engaged with animals. They see themselves as part of something. They see themselves as being a component of the natural environment rather than somebody outside looking in. And they are just absorbed with it to this day. So they're active spear fishermen. My oldest son's skydiving now. The young bloke speared his biggest fish recently, and so he's becoming attached to that, and got them all going through nippers. They all went through nippers. The 2 older boys are lifesavers. The middle one's representing Surfers Paradise in the boat rowing and competing in the Australian Nationals soon. And I can see that there's a few things at play there. Introduction to nature, those kids have never been scared of the dark. They've never had monsters under the bed. There's never ever that issue. They see the dark and the bush as their safe place. And then the next thing I do with them is then I teach them and give them all of the skills they need. So the fire skills, the campcraft skills, the foraging skills, the hunting skills, the fishing skills, empower them with all of that. And then I send them off by themselves when they're 13. They've got to go for their own overnight camp, and they can only take lighter, knife, just the basics. They got a basic sleeping bag. Sometimes they take a hand spear, and both Nicholas and Michael. Luke has been. He hasn't been by himself, but he's soon to go. He's 13, so it's a little bit later, but he's ready now. They just come back so satisfied. They're full. Their bellies are full. They're safe. They've enjoyed some sort of interaction by themselves with nature that's just been wonderful. And it really gives them a sense of power and security. So I can't emphasise that enough. No, whether you're in the city or whether you're in the country, make the time to connect the kids with their world, with the planet, and not see it as a scary place. There's so many messages they get all the time. Talk about a scary place. It's not really a scary place.
That's fascinating. I look back some of the things my dad, and I'm really grateful that he gave me a love of the outdoors and nature and stuff like that. But it was never one-on-one. It was with my brothers, and doing that in groups. So yeah, it's a big month for Complete Men as of the 1st of February. We've taken in, and whether it's a merge or whatever, an organisation called Powerhouse Programs that I started off volunteering with about 12 years ago when I got sober, and ended up leading groups with them, and then running their camps. And now I'm a director on the board, and we take boys 13 to 16 and their dads into the bush for a week, no power, no cell phone signal, and we do men's work.
What's the organisation called again?
Powerhouse Programs.
Powerhouse Programs. It's another one to put on.
Yeah.
And also my little side thing that I do, Project Tricky Mission.
Yeah.
So, and that's like, I do some similar stuff. You and I'll have a chat about that later.
Cool.
With, sailing and spearfishing and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So it's a family program. So we have a program for the mums, program for the dads, program for the boys, and so the boys come in, and we have a bit of a ritual parting with mum, and they come into the campsite, and we encourage the dads to tell stories about things like when they were the boys' age and what their relationship was like with dad, and don't put any current stuff in it. Go back then, and no moralizing, no philosophizing, no advice giving or whatever. And so we really work on training up the dads on how to do that. And fortunately, we get a few experienced men come and they know how to do that. And the boys are pretty amazed. And we do the same thing. What was it like with mum? You know, from look at me, mummy, to, you know, how were the apron strings loosened? When did you want to first have your secrets and independence and all of that? What's it like with mum these days? And we might do a session on what have been some of the challenges in your life, and, you know, things like mental illness or addictions or, you know, business losses, that sort of stuff can come up. And what's been some of the grief in your life? And there's lots of tears at that one. And at the end of each session, we get the boys to share on something, and they're right into it and open up, and we have a lot of fun games and things like that. And then part of it is a challenge, an overnight thing similar to what you said. And the idea is that each boy will take a challenge tailored to himself. Some will take the basic minimal level, and others will add all sorts of things onto it. And there's no internet, there's no Google, there's no friends. They're on their own, and they discover they've got, whether they realise it at the time or not, or some of them it clicks 2 or 3 years later when they're in the middle of some big crisis or something, they've got an inner resource that it will be okay, that it doesn't need a quick fix or a mum or a dad or a Google or a Facebook or a Snapchat or whatever it is that they use. They've got this thing inside them. And then the next big thing, component of a rite of passage, is we have an honouring, where each young man will get honoured by his dad, by one of the other dads and one of our staff members, and then a big community celebration where hopefully, you know, granddad, grandma and siblings and everything are there to welcome them back. They went away as a young boy or a big boy, and they come back as a young man. And that's really, really rewarding work. And I can see a couple of guys who did it years ago in their early 30s are now running the program. And I just see Facebook posts from, you know, men now who are 25, 26, who I was a staff support worker on their camp, and, you know, they're having kids, they're getting jobs, they're having mental breakdowns, just life as usual. And it's just wonderful to see, you know, how this impacted their lives. Very rewarding stuff.
Yeah, that's been missing. That ceremony's been missing. And it's something that was present in all cultures across the planet, you know, arising in a natural way, that there was something that was needed for a proper development.
Yeah, and Dad's not around these days. He's off at work and all of that stuff. And we still carry some of the stuff from the culture, because I remember as a little kid, getting told, if I was sad, I'd cry, and getting told, oh, it's okay, come to mummy, you know, or whatever. There, mummy kiss it better. But big boys don't cry. It's okay for little boys to cry. Big boys don't cry. And I must have figured, wow, this has got to be good being a man, because big boys and men don't get sad, because if you're sad, you cry. No one told me that, but it's the message I picked up. And then I remember in about first class at school getting called a scaredy cat or a chicken or yellow or a coward or whatever it was for being scared, and also getting these messages, well, it's okay, little boy, to be scared, you know, but big boys are brave. Men are brave. Men don't get scared. And I'm thinking, I can't wait to be a man. This is going to be awesome. Not only I'll never feel sad, I'll never feel scared.
Don't be scared. Wow.
And it was all true, because I'd never seen a man cry.
Yeah.
You know, gee, I've seen a lot of it now, but back then I'd never seen a man cry. So I'm thinking, fantastic. So when I became a man, whenever that was, if I felt sad, well, there's something wrong with me, I better hide that. Or, you know, down, I'll project it out and I'll blame and get angry and fix it. I couldn't feel scared. No, I've got this. It's okay. I'm not a pussy.
Yeah.
And I probably didn't, I'm a highly anxious person. I'd feel fear, but what I'd really feel that was a lot worse is the shame of feeling the fear. And having to just bury that and keep that to myself. And that's a wonderful thing about a men's group is if somebody's sharing something deep like that, if another guy's had an experience of it, they'll stick up their hand. It doesn't mean I want to go to the bathroom. It means me too. And when a man's sharing something a bit scary and awkward like that about his shame, seeing 3 or 4 other hands go up, it's just like, oh, thank God I'm not the only one. Okay, I'm going to go a bit deeper now. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think we could finish there, Tim. That's a good spot to finish on.
Great.
I think that's a terrific spot to finish on.
Cool.
Thanks, mate. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Crime Scene Gold Coast with Guardian Criminal Law. We're enjoying bringing you these podcasts on a weekly basis, and we look forward to bringing you many more. We've got a Patreon page where you can subscribe. That'll assist us in bringing you future episodes, and also any money raised through that goes towards a youth help program that we're running. We look forward to your company for many months to come. Thank you.